Welcome to the MS&Me Radio Network. The broadcast shows are for informational and entertainment purposes only. They are not designed to provide listeners with specific personal, medical, or counseling advice. Individuals with a medical issue should always consult their healthcare provider. MS&Me is not responsible for content of individual shows. The views expressed by show hosts or their guests are their own. Enjoy the show.
Hi there. Welcome to the 76th episode of A Couple Takes on MS. Hi, this is Dan Digman.
And hi, it's me, Jennifer Digman.
How are you doing tonight, Jennifer?
I'm good, thank you. How about yourself?
I'm fabulous. Welcome to A Couple Takes on MS, where we are a couple who both have multiple sclerosis, have been married for going on 14 years. I'm Dan, and I have relapsing remitting MS.
And hi, of course, it's me, Jennifer, and I have secondary progressive MS, and combined, Dan and I have been taking on this incredible illness for more than 20 years each.
20 years each, more than 40 combined.
So. Oh, I'm sorry, yeah, I said combined, and then I said separately.
Yeah, no.
That's why you're good. You're
Right.
you're the yin to my yang, and we make it sensical.
That's so we think.
I hope so.
Well, what we're talking about today, I don't know if y'all saw this recently. It was on the Tony Awards where Ali Stroker won the Tony Award, and she is in a wheelchair making history for the first actress in a wheelchair to win a Tony. And in her acceptance speech, she said, "This award is for every kid who is watching tonight who has a disability, who has a limitation or a challenge." And essentially then celebrating, saying, you now see somebody, as if you are somebody who is growing up or who is in a wheelchair, you are represented on the stage for the Tony Awards for the first time. And what an incredible, magnificent moment that is, and something to happen like that.
And every person that we've seen on television or read comments on Facebook that saw Allie in Oklahoma just talked about how amazing she was, and her acceptance speech, which Dan read part of, she was very eloquent, and she's dynamic, and as a wheelchair user, I was just really happy and proud for her. She's been in her wheelchair since she was maybe 2 years.
2 years old. She was bless you. She was in a car accident that left her paralyzed from, I don't want to say like
chest down,
yeah, something like that. So it wasn't necessarily multiple sclerosis, but it was a car accident. But I think just being in a wheelchair for representing for people with physical disabilities is really something incredible.
And that goes to the title of the show that we've called it today. It's the question of, are you represented?
And that's what we're with that talking about then within the multiple sclerosis community is like, are you represented in the mainstream media? Do we have role models, people to look up to, people to inspire us within the multiple sclerosis community? And had several things that these are just great questions. So it's like, are you represented, and why is that important, and what more representation, how would you feel represented?
I think that certainly, because Dan and I have both been diagnosed for as long as we have. Back in the day when I was first diagnosed, I knew about Annette Funicello, and some people may know who I'm talking about and be nodding, and then there are some who may not. But Annette Funicello was living with MS, and Then we heard about Terry Garr and Squiggy from Laverne and Shirley,
David
Lander. And just to hear those people when I was first diagnosed, to see them continuing and having successful careers, that really helped, just to know that you're not alone and that you can see other people. And certainly in the 23 years since I've been diagnosed, the numbers are enormous. People living with multiple sclerosis.
And they say there now are nearly 1 million Americans who live with multiple sclerosis. And then just talking about, you cite Terry Garr, David Lander, and the like, as far as celebrities with multiple sclerosis. And I think that's the important thing, is just that, celebrities keep things at the forefront. Now, I just kind of a sidestep, but just like, think of what happened on Capitol Hill recently, that Jon Stewart was there advocating for the 9/11 first responders and stuff for federal funding that they've been denied, or that Congress has ignored for.
Well, the funding is potentially running out. And those men and women, brave men and women, were heroes, and the fund that is taking care of them was getting close to running out. And Jon Stewart was there making the point that we can't leave these heroes without taking care of them.
And just like that, very next day, the Judiciary Committee passed
that.
The money is on the table, and I dare say it will pass, and it will. And the point is, just when you have a powerful voice like a celebrity, like a Jon Stewart, like now with all of the new celebrities that we have, like in the 20-some years since we've been diagnosed. I mean, just recently with like Selma Blair and Jack Osbourne and Jamie Lynn Sigler and Art Alexakis from Everclear.
Yes.
I mean, just where you have these celebrities to advocate. But then I guess the question is, this is awesome because they are, powerful voices, prominent voices. Do you feel represented, like, with that? I mean, when we see that, does that represent you?
Are you asking me personally?
I'm asking you. I'm asking everyone listening out there in listener land.
And me personally, I feel represented because they're all living with multiple sclerosis, the celebrities that you just named. And some of them are younger than me, some of them are close to my age. And they're celebrities, which I'm not. But it's people living with multiple sclerosis that are brave enough to come out and discuss their illness in front of the world and everyone. So I think, yes, I feel represented. How about yourself?
I think so. I think that it's because really it's the multiple sclerosis. I mean, that MS is out there, so anytime they do stories on these people, and the Jack Osbournes and everything, they do stories that keeps multiple sclerosis in the public eye, in discussion. It's not, so then when you and I go, or there's other MS advocates doing advocacy work, it's something that becomes more relatable for people who aren't necessarily in the multiple sclerosis world.
And I'm sure there are people who are listening who, if I say when I was first diagnosed with MS, I would tell people, oh, I was diagnosed with MS, and they would say, oh, are you one of Jerry's kids? And I'm sure, again, that joke may be dated, but, there was the confusion that I had multiple sclerosis, not muscular dystrophy. Jerry Lewis was attached to muscular dystrophy because of all the fundraising he did. But now MS, people say, oh, like Jack Osbourne, you've been diagnosed, or, oh, I just saw something about Selma Blair. So that celebrity helps to make the disease a little bit more approachable, if that's the word, considering that they're celebrities. But they're living with the same disease we are.
And I think the question then is, um, do you feel more represented by Allie, the wheelchair user who won the Tony? Is that more representative of you, or is there somebody more with multiple sclerosis?
That's a really good question because I have been in my wheelchair. I've been diagnosed for 23 years, and about 5 years after I was diagnosed, I began using my wheelchair. So while I see things in common with the men and women who are diagnosed with MS that are still walking, I do feel I have a little more in common with Allie, even though she doesn't have multiple sclerosis. She knows and understands the challenges of needing accommodations for a wheelchair, and you can't just get in your friend's car and drive to the mall. Well, she's kind of famous, so she wouldn't do that in the first place, probably. But just those limitations of living with a wheelchair. You, as a person who's still able to walk, do you feel any kinship with a particular celebrity? Do you feel closer to the male entertainers who have disclosed their multiple sclerosis?
I I would say probably yeah. I mean those who that are more relatable to me, um, or at least that I can relate more to their stories. Somebody that's been there, that's had MS long before I did, was Clay Walker, the country singer. Because
yes.
and I remember when I was growing up, and Clay Walker had like his debut album and everything, and he was, he's good, and I really liked him. And maybe just after his first album and do a second album or something, they had announced on the radio that Clay Walker had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. I did not know that much, if anything, about MS. And so then, like, in a couple months, couple years, whatever later, and Clay Walker came out with a new album, and I was just ecstatic. I said, oh, good, he's not dead yet. I mean, just because that's how limited my knowledge was at the time, and just saying, oh, that's. And so for that, and that Clay Walker still is touring, doing, that's like, when we watch some videos and interviews with Art from Art, I call him Art like he's my buddy or something, Alex Zakis from Everclear, but just where he talks that he is still touring. And so I think it's just like when there are people that I see, and obviously, Selma Blair, and I guess maybe because I don't relate to the acting world, not that I'm a musician or anything, but it's just that that they're still working, that I'm just thinking, I can still do that.
Yes, and I think what's interesting is when Selma Blair, because it was relatively recently, that she talked about her diagnosis with multiple sclerosis, and my first instinct was, oh, poor thing. And then, you have that moment where you're like, duh, Jennifer, you're living with it, you're dealing with it, Dan's living with it. We have friends in our support group. They're doing just fine, so Selma can take it. And that's the representation where it's another person living with MS. And I think it's funny, when we have new group members that are diagnosed, and you're instantly like, oh, you poor thing. But again, we're dealing with it.
Do you think then, because I thought the same thing too, because we just had somebody come to our support group who was just diagnosed 2 weeks ago. and we were very much like, poor thing. However, it's not so for me, or as we talk about it, is it so much poor thing that because this person has multiple sclerosis, or just that we remember what that was like when we first were diagnosed and know just how challenging that was. I mean, obviously we're, as you would, as I would say, like seasoned veterans that we've lived with the disease, we've had it, we're dealing with it, But that initial shock to the system, I mean, I would not want to have to live through that again.
We are active with the Central Michigan University physical therapy students, and they're getting close to being done with school, and they're studying and they're exhausting themselves, and it's kind of like a new MS diagnosis. Like, I wouldn't want to go back to college and have to study and have those late nights and do all that homework. And with the diagnosis with MS, I'm not so much, oh, poor thing, because you're living with the disease. But I'm just like, man, I remember how full of questioning and how much information I had to learn. And I feel like same way with college kids, where it's like, I've done that. I'm thank God I'm past that point. So maybe that's why we.
He was like, yeah.
You just feel like there's so much work you have to do.
And then, yeah, and the thought of having to go through that work and just the emotions and everything. Yeah. I think that then, when we talk about our show, A Couple Takes on MS, and because we're showing two very different effects of the disease. Woman, secondary progressive, no longer can walk. Man, relapsing, remitting, and I still can walk. And so we show that. It was a couple weeks ago. I don't know if we've talked about that on our show here, but we were featured in a feature story in People magazine. It was all posted online. And
it was in conjunction with World MS Day, which was May 30th, 2019. And people online talked to us about our multiple sclerosis. And it was an amazing experience. We got to share our story and also talk about the Cell Gene Mind Shift project that they were doing.
The MS Mind Shift. Yeah, Cell Gene with the Multiple Sclerosis Association of America and everything.
Thank you for filling that in. I was drawing a blank. So we had this amazing opportunity and we got to share our story. And it's interesting, most people were really, really fabulous. They're wonderful, commenting about how nice our story is.
And it was nice because then, of course, obviously in this day and age, you share it on social media. So it's all over Facebook and Twitter and everything. And the People magazine put it on their Facebook. And I mean, that was getting some good traction. And the MS Society had shared it on their Facebook. And, and you love seeing the comments, and just because, obviously our story, we wanted to get it out there to represent and show more things. There was a person who had commented and saying a note to the National MS Society and People magazine that, rather than always showing celebrities and, quote, folks like at Dan Jen Dig, why not show people who or do stories on people who don't have insurance, who are on waiting lists, who can't work, who can't get out of their house and stuff, and then just, put #reality. And, on some levels, I mean, obviously it kind of threw me off for a second because it's just not that I expect the world to love us.
But of course we expect the world to love us.
Well, I think it's just that kind of shocked me because here you had a story in a major publication online about, I mean, truly, we're just regular folk with multiple sclerosis. We're not celebrities. We don't have access to all the glory that all the medicines and treatments and doctors and that's the celebrities have. And I thought, why is that not a reality? Obviously, and so then it's the question, obviously then they didn't feel represented, even though we're just regular people. Still wasn't regular enough to show the MS realities.
And to which I say, we have a happy story. It's not all happiness. I mean, for heaven's sakes, we're living with MS, each of us, and there are things, but would you really pick up a People magazine to read a woe is me story? Or, it's entertainment. That's what People is. And I don't know if people would want to read little P people, not big P people. A story about people who are dealing with fatigue, and they're talking about the pain of the disease and the tertiary issues of, the urinary tract infections, or not being able to afford your medication, or not have a caregiver. So we were a little surprised by that. But this reader who commented did have a point that maybe this person felt like her story or his story, I don't remember, needed to be represented. And so Dan and I are always telling people to be your own best advocate. And I wonder, was that person being his or her best advocate by saying, don't forget about the people like us that don't have loving spouses and caregivers and things like that. I mean, I was a little bummed because I was like,
get to know us.
Just get to know us, and our world is not all rainbows and puppy dogs. I mean, we do have our challenges, but again, I don't know that people would want to read that.
And I think that's where the kudos to that person. I mean, obviously it hurt because of just like we're one of you.
Yeah.
And it's just like, we all have the multiple sclerosis.
And together we're stronger.
Yeah, indeed. And that's where I say, when we're advocating in DC or advocating for things, for funding, for research, for this, I'm there speaking for this person. You're speaking for this person, and the representation. I think that I lost my train of thought there, babe.
Well, just, the dissension is good, or that differing opinion. I think about our pastor from church, and she often said, if everyone got along, because at church, there's occasional disagreements, and she will often say, Jennifer, if everyone got along, think how boring that would be. And, if this person who commented #reality hadn't said something like that, we would have not thought about the people that our life is not reality too. And those are the stories we need to continue to think about, and those are the voices we need to advocate for.
Because when we're advocating, it's not just about Dan and Jennifer. Obviously, it's our story, but I mean, it's for all the collective good. But I think that's where as we're talking about representation and why that's important, and why I want those, my story out there, your story out there. It's like, because I know that when I was first diagnosed, I was looking for somebody I could relate to. And obviously there are people out there who are newly diagnosed or are living with the disease, need someone to relate to. There are people out there who could, we can relate together on that. However, the person who commented about the #reality, there are people that could relate to that person more than me. And so that's where we all, within the MS community, I mean, we all need to make our voices heard, and we all need to represent, because, again, pulling from the National MS Society, together we are stronger. It's just like, ours is not the only voices
out there that need to be heard.
To be out there.
And I think that's, like you said, really important. And just fair representation so that everyone can get their story out there. But if you aren't happy, you need to reach out and try and change it. This person made the point, like, try and focus on the other stories. And maybe she couldn't sit down and write her own story right then, but she could at least make the change or request the change. Like, don't forget about people that don't have a story the same as Dan and Jennifer. I think that was really what she was saying. And maybe she was just thinking people like me, herself, need to get some attention. We
And
need to be thought about.
and that, you know, and that's where I think just the initial thought and feelings is like, well, you don't like me, you didn't like our story, but it's like, and you see where she was coming from, and then you understand, and I think that's where we as an MS community, it's like we're all in the same boat.
And we're all going through the same thing. And just being together, even with dissension, even with those occasional snags in the way, when all our voices are out there, we're stronger. And you can't forget nearly 1 million people living in the United States with this disease, especially when we use our voices. And whether that be typing a letter to government official or just commenting on a People magazine article, using our voice is powerful. But we want to see representation of ourselves. At the core, we all want to see ourselves, because we want to get out there. We don't want to be forgotten.
Well, and I think that's just where, with going back, Ali Stroker, it's just like, people say in terms of, that she's in a wheelchair and that or uses a wheelchair. I don't think she necessarily thinks that she's up there representing, as for somebody with multiple sclerosis to see them or, her representing. But at the same time, you never know who you're going to impact with your story. And so I think just to be out there to represent for you, for other people.
And I think that that's the point, is just continue to be represented, to get your voice out there, and just know that all of us are facing challenges, and if we work together and just keep our story, keep our voices present, we'll be stronger.
So thank you all again for checking in with us today for a couple takes on MS. Reach out to us on our website is danandjenniferdigman.com or on Twitter at danjendig. Until next time, thanks to Blue Draft Kid for composing our theme music, and thanks to the MS&Me Radio Network for having us on. Take care.